Halyna had her back to me directly, and she was wearing, I'll never forget, she was wearing this sort of silvery, shiny coat, and there was a hole in it, and immediately, I'm bleeding profusely.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. That was the Special Effects Coordinator Thomas Gandy speaking on Good Morning America, and as you heard, quite graphic testimony there in his statement. It's certainly a lot more graphic than Alec Baldwin's, who said that he thought Halyna might have fainted, right? And so what he's saying is that you could immediately see what had happened. You could immediately see that Halyna was injured. Now, although Thomas Gandy was actually in the church, he was in the building when this happened, you have him talking, giving his version of events. Meanwhile, the assistant director, the guy who actually handed him the weapon and said, "Cold gun," Dave Hall, he hasn't been speaking, and he's actually been asked to cooperate with the investigation and make a statement on 2 occasions, and he's refused to do so. In fact, his position has been that he only wants to make a statement once the investigation is complete. Quite strange, isn't it? Now, obviously what you want to do is get first-hand information from the people on the scene, the people who were there, and who better to get it than from the Rust director, the guy who was actually injured, just as the cinematographer who died, Halyna Hutchins, was injured and fatally injured in her case. So there's almost no one better to give a version of events, first-hand version of events, an eyewitness version of events, than the Rust director. And so we're going to deal with that in this episode. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Like, share, leave a comment. You can subscribe by clicking on the light blue icon on the bottom right of your screen. And let's get started. So we are now going to go through the Rust search warrant, and I will provide a link to the full search warrant so that you guys can read it on your own time. The extract I'm going to read deals only with what the Rust director, Joel Souza, is the director and writer, what his experience was, right? So we're going to go through that. And it starts on Friday, October 22nd, 2021, at approximately 1 p.m., Santa Fe County detectives made contact with Joel Souza, who sustained a gunshot wound to the right shoulder. Joel was given the opportunity to give a statement regarding the incident that occurred at 545 Bonanza Creek Filming Ranch in Santa Fe, New Mexico on Thursday, October 21st, 2021. Now, just think about the situation. He was shot, and a day later he was approached by the authorities, and then he did actually make that statement. So even though he was injured, he was willing and able and capable and wanting to make a statement. Now compare that to the assistant director who more than a month later, kind of a month and a half later, is still waiting to give his version of events. In any event, this is Joel Souza's story. He says, so Joel said that the workday started at about 6:30 a.m. He said that the crew usually meets and has breakfast on the property. During the morning hours, the day started off late due to a camera crew walking off set the previous day. So a lot is happening here. You know, it's the 20th of October. I think 6 people on the Rust crew sort of walked off the set. The very next day, the shooting happened and Joel himself got shot. And the day after that, he had to make a statement, right? And so what is also interesting is the crew was replaced almost immediately. The crew that walked off was replaced virtually immediately. But that doesn't mean they would know what to do. That doesn't mean that there would be sort of a seamless operation the next day. So reading from the affidavit, Joel said once they hired another camera crew to assist, the day was taking longer than usual because they only had one camera to do the filming. Joel was asked about the employees' behavior, and he said everyone was getting along and there were no altercations that took place to his knowledge. Joel said he was standing beside cinematographer Halyna Hutchins, viewing the camera angles on a camera lens. The rehearsal took place inside the church building where actor Alec Baldwin was sitting on a wooden pew facing south towards the camera and crew. Now, what isn't actually mentioned here, which I think is very important and quite vital, is that Halyna was actually just 18 inches from the muzzle of the weapon that actually cost her life. In other words, very, very close, standing right in front of Alec Baldwin, right? Now, if you're uncertain, 18 inches is about 45, 46 centimeters. It's less than half a meter. So it's virtually less than arm's length. That is the distance that separated Alec Baldwin from Halyna. And because of this closeness, you've got to wonder, how would he not know what happened to her? How would he not see what happened to her? So going to the affidavit, Joel said that the rehearsal entailed actor Alec Baldwin cross-drawing his weapon and pointing the revolver towards the camera lens. According to Joel, it was his belief the gun being used in the rehearsal was safe, and used the term cold gun when explaining the firearm safety announcements. He said he remembered the phrase cold gun being said while preparing for the scene. Joel explained what he knows about firearm safety. He said what he knows is 3 people had been handling the guns or firearms for the scenes. He said the firearms are checked by Hannah Gutierrez, the armorer, and then the firearm is checked by the assistant director, Dave Halls, who then gives it to the actor using the firearm. And so what is quite interesting is I don't think Hannah was in the building, but assistant director Dave Halls, where he had to have been in the building because he apparently handed the gun to him. And so why don't we have his statement? He's almost the most important person besides Alec Baldwin himself. And yet you don't have his statement. Strange, isn't it? Joel said as far as he knows, no one gets checked for live ammunition on their person prior and after the scenes are being filmed. The only thing checked are the firearms to avoid live ammunition being in them. Joel stated there should never be live rounds whatsoever near or around the scene. Joel explained that prior to the discharge of the firearm by actor Alec Baldwin, they had been working on preparing for the scene before lunch. Joel said they broke for lunch around 12:30 and had to be shuttled to an area away from the set, and Joel advised they returned back to the set after lunch, although he's not sure if the firearm was checked again. Joel stated that Alec was sitting in a pew in a church building setting and he was practicing a cross draw, and he said that he was looking over the shoulder of Halyna when he heard a sound, and he said it sounded like a popping sound. I just want to go back a little bit, and I think it's really important to look at the fact that this happened after lunch. And what I mean is the timing, just to simplify it, is they all went and had lunch, so they were working and whatever, and then they all went on lunch. And then when they came back, this is when the accident happened, right? And I think it's quite important because often, I don't know if you're an office worker, there is often that sort of slowness and laziness that sets in the middle of the day after you've had lunch. So, for example, if you come to work first thing in the morning, you may have kind of a lot more spring in your step and a lot more energy in the first few hours up to mid-morning, assuming you've had quite a good sleep, right? Whereas as you get into the afternoon section of a work day, particularly immediately after lunch, that can have an impact on attention spans, on attention to detail, all things like that. And I would be interested to know what was eaten at that lunch, because you can have certain foods that cause changes in blood sugar that can affect concentration. For example, sugary foods would lead to a jump in energy levels, but then a situation where the energy drops as well. And we do know that they would be shuttled to this lunch area and then back, and so suggest there might have been time for blood sugar levels to drop. I'm just saying this may have an impact on attention spans and that kind of thing. It would also be interesting to know what the assistant director, Dave Hall, what did he have for lunch? What did he have to drink? And now we get to this important area, which is the actual incident. And this is what Joel remembers. He says, bear in mind, and this is also quite important, Joel is speaking one day, is making the statement one day after the incident. And so the fact is, the statement we're going to get from Dave Hall is already a month and a half old. And he probably would say something like, well, I don't remember, I don't recall, I'm not sure, so much time has gone by, I don't know. And that is the unfortunate aspect in this time delay that has been going on. So anyway, Joel says that Halyna began to stumble backwards and she was assisted to the ground. He doesn't say by whom. He doesn't say who assisted her to the ground. The other thing is that he says Halyna complained about her stomach and grabbed her midsection. So I don't know how Alec Baldwin could say he thought she was fainting if she's grabbing her stomach. I mean, he doesn't say anything about that in his story. There's nothing about her saying anything or doing anything. You just get the idea that she is standing there and the next minute she's sort of on the ground and he's got no idea what happened. Whereas she's not inert, she's talking, she's in distress, she's complaining, and probably not in a low-pitched tone, but in a distressed tone. And as we've just heard from the special effects coordinator, it's Thomas Gandy, he said that you could see blood immediately. You could also see the hole in her coat immediately. And so if he could see it, why couldn't Alec Baldwin see it? And if Halyna was distressed and she was right in front of Alec Baldwin, like an arm's length away, couldn't he bend over and render assistance to her? And so it's also quite important to get Joel's version of events. And he also said that he was bleeding from his shoulder and he could see blood on Halyna. So even in his distressed state, he could see that Halyna was injured. So they were both injured. You've got two people injured, not just one, and both of them bleeding, and none of this is mentioned by Alec Baldwin. And then he's also asked, do you feel guilty? Right? And he says no. Anyway, going on through the statement, he says, once Santa Fe County detectives completed the interview with Joel, I made contact with Reed Russell, who is identified as a cameraman who was standing next to Joel and Halyna at the time of the incident. So we know of a few individuals now. There's Reed Russell, there's Joel, there's obviously Alec Baldwin, there is Thomas Gandy. So we're starting to get a sort of a list of people that we can speak to. And then obviously there's a other list of people who seem to have a different version of events or aren't saying anything. And so you have this weird situation where there's a battle of narratives, one story versus another. We've already got a story in terms of the conditions overall at the set, with one group saying that everything was wonderful, it was this amazing fairy tale, and others saying it wasn't so great. It wasn't worth working in those conditions. So I just want to touch on what Reed said, Reed Russell. He arrived early to eat breakfast on the day of the incident. Reed said that he had much work to complete due to the camera crew of about 6 walking out of the film. Reed stated that the camera crew was having issues with production involving payment and housing, right? Reed also said that the camera crew that walked out on the film wrote a letter to production on disagreements. The fact that a letter is written means that it wasn't just sort of random bickering. It was actually something that had progressed and was bad enough to complain about. Anyway, Reed said that while he was working with the camera in the setting for the movie, he had stepped out for about 5 minutes after returning from lunch. He said when he had returned back into the setting for the scene, Alec, Joel and Halyna were already in possession of the firearm and had been preparing for the scene. He was not sure if the firearm had been checked due to his absence of the 5 minutes. And so that is going to be the critical area. Was it checked? And you might say, that the responsibility lies on the person responsible for checking, which is the assistant director. But you could also argue that the person who was in charge of the whole film was actually present as well. And so was he managing the protocols? Was he making sure that the protocols were being implemented? I mean, he's there. Is he making sure that it's happening? And so you're going to find out whether that's the case or not through what the crew say. Now, I know some people feel that this whole thing is much ado about nothing, that because it wasn't intentional, and I don't believe it was intentional, no one should be liable. It's just unfortunate. But what we're seeing now is more and more conflicting stories, right? And there don't need to be conflicting stories. Why can't people just say what happened? And it feels a bit like there's a cover-up here, doesn't it? It feels like certain people aren't saying things. It feels like certain things are being minimized. It feels like certain things are being said that are misleading or not entirely accurate. And so one does wonder, if something is covered up, is it because something needs to be covered up? What do you guys think? So I'm not going to take it further than that. I do think the next milestone is going to be the Rust Assistant Director Dave Hall's, his statement. Is he going to make a statement? Is he going to plead the fifth? Is he going to not be able to remember anything? Is his statement going to be supportive of Alec Baldwin's statement or what? What is going to come through his statement? Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.